There are moments in life when you see something that everyone else misses, a detail, a pattern, a silent cry for help hidden in plain sight. I am Lauren Mitchell, and for 15 years I have dedicated my life to intensive care nursing at Sharp Memorial Hospital in San Diego, California. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where winter taught me that survival often means paying attention to what others overlook. But nothing in my training prepared me for the day a young Marine started pulling away from everyone in complete silence, and I realized what no one else could see. What I discovered that night did not just change his life, it exposed a dark secret happening within the walls of the hospital itself, and it nearly cost both of us everything. My journey to San Diego began with a promise I made to myself at 19 years old. I was working as a volunteer at a community hospital in Milwaukee when I witnessed a nurse save a man's life with nothing but her hands, her knowledge, and her absolute refusal to give up. That image burned itself into my mind. I knew then that I wanted to be that person for someone else. I studied, I worked double shifts to pay for nursing school, and I graduated with honors. But it was not enough for me to just be good. I wanted to be exceptional. So I moved to San Diego 10 years ago, drawn by the challenge of working in one of the busiest trauma centers on the West Coast. Sharp Memorial Hospital is where miracles and tragedies happen side by side, sometimes within minutes of each other. The intensive care unit is where I found my calling. This is where patients arrive when every second counts, when families pray in waiting rooms, when we fight against death itself. I have seen incredible recoveries and devastating losses, but I have also learned to read people in ways that go beyond vital signs and medical charts. I learned to see fear, hope, and sometimes desperation in a patient's eyes, even when they cannot speak. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when Marcus arrived. I was starting my shift when the paramedics brought him in, 24 years old, Marine Corps, just back from a classified mission overseas. Physically, he was stable. Minor shrapnel wounds, dehydration, exhaustion, nothing life-threatening. But the moment I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made my chest tighten. It was not pain. It was not fear of death. It was something darker, something that made him look at everyone in that room like we were the enemy. The attending physician, Dr. Richardson, ran through the standard protocol: pain management, IV fluids, psychological evaluation for post-traumatic stress. Marcus did not resist. He did not argue. He just laid there, staring at the ceiling, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. I introduced myself, tried to make conversation, asked him simple questions about his comfort level. Nothing. Complete silence. But here is what I noticed that no one else did. Every time someone in scrubs entered the room, his heart rate spiked on the monitor. Not when his family visited, not when the chaplain came by, only medical staff. And his eyes would track certain people with an intensity that felt like surveillance. Something was very wrong, and it had nothing to do with post-traumatic stress. If this story has already grabbed you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. And comment below where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching. The next 48 hours confirmed my suspicions. Marcus was not just withdrawn, he was actively protecting himself. He refused medication unless I was the one administering it. He would not eat food unless it came directly from the hospital cafeteria sealed tray. He asked for his door to be left open at all times, positioning himself so he could see everyone who walked past. The psychiatric team labeled it severe paranoia and recommended heavy sedation. Dr. Richardson agreed. I was the only voice in the room who disagreed. During a team meeting, I tried to explain what I was seeing, the patterns, the specific triggers, the way Marcus seemed to be gathering information rather than shutting down. My supervisor, Helen Cortez, cut me off mid-sentence. She said I was projecting, that I was too emotionally involved, that my job was to follow the treatment plan, not to psychoanalyze patients. The room went silent. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and frustration, but I also felt something else, certainty. I knew I was right. That night I stayed late. I found reasons to check on Marcus more frequently than necessary. Around midnight, I noticed something. He was writing on a small notepad, his movements quick and secretive. When I approached, he hid it immediately. I did not push. Instead, I pulled up a chair and I spoke to him like a human being, not a case file. I told him about Milwaukee, about the brutal winters, about how my father taught me that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest truths. And then I said something that changed everything. I told him that if he was in danger, I would believe him. No questions asked. His hand stopped moving. He looked at me for the first time with something other than suspicion. And slowly, carefully, he slid the notepad toward me. It was filled with numbers, rows and rows of coordinates. At first, I thought it was part of his military work, classified information he should not be sharing. But then I noticed something else. else. These were not overseas coordinates. These were locations in San Diego, specific addresses scattered throughout the city. And at the bottom of the page, written in small, desperate letters, were 3 words: "They are watching." I felt my blood run cold. This was not paranoia. This was a warning. But who was watching? And why? I looked at Marcus, and in that moment, we had an understanding. He was not safe here, and somehow, I had just become part of whatever danger he was facing. The problem was, I had no idea how deep it went, or who I could trust. The only thing I knew for certain was that the other nurses were wrong about him. And the one person who seemed most concerned about Marcus was Derek Simmons, a night shift nurse who always seemed to be around Marcus's room even when he was not assigned to that patient. I had worked with Derek for 3 years. He was efficient, professional, well-liked, but now, watching him hover near Marcus's door, I felt my instincts screaming, "Thank you for staying with me this far. It shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this."
So go ahead and subscribe and hit that bell, because what comes now changes everything. I could not stop thinking about those coordinates. During my break, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and entered them into my phone one by one. What I found made my stomach drop. Every single location was connected to pharmacies, medical supply stores, or known drug distribution areas in San Diego. This was not random. This was a map. But a map of what? And how did a Marine recovering from overseas deployment have this information? I knew I needed to be careful. If Marcus was right, if someone really was watching, then any unusual behavior from me could put us both at risk. So I did what I do best. I became invisible. I blended into the routine. I smiled at the right moments. I kept my head down. But I also started paying attention to things I had never noticed before. The medication logs, the inventory reports, the patterns of who worked which shifts, and when certain supplies seemed to run low faster than they should. It took me 3 days to find the first discrepancy. We were supposed to have 40 vials of fentanyl in the secure cabinet. The log showed 40, but when I physically counted during a legitimate restocking, there were only 32. Someone had taken 8 vials and falsified the paperwork. My hands were shaking as I wrote down the date and time. I checked other medications: oxycodone, morphine, hydromorphone. Every single controlled substance showed the same pattern. The numbers on paper did not match reality, and every discrepancy occurred during night shifts. When Derek Simmons was on duty, I felt sick. I had laughed with this man. I had covered his shifts when his daughter was sick. I had trusted him, and now I was staring at evidence that he might be stealing medications from dying patients. But I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof, and I needed to keep Marcus safe while I figured out what to do. That evening, I went to Marcus's room and closed the door halfway, a signal we had developed that meant we could talk quietly. I told him what I found. His reaction was not surprise. It was relief. Finally, someone believed him. He told me his story in fragments, his voice barely above a whisper. During his first week in the hospital, he had woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. He saw Derek and another nurse, someone Marcus did not recognize, removing medications from the supply room. At first, he thought nothing of it, but then he saw them replacing the vials with something else: saline solution, placebos. Marcus, trained in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, started watching. He documented everything: times, faces, quantities. He realized he had stumbled onto a drug trafficking operation running out of the hospital itself. But then they realized he had seen them, and that was when everything changed. Marcus told me that someone tried to kill him 2 nights ago. A medication error that was not an error at all. An injection that nearly stopped his heart. The only reason he survived was because another nurse walked in at the exact moment and called a code. Since then, Marcus had refused all medications and waited for someone, anyone, to see what was happening. I was the first person who looked close enough to notice. Now we faced an impossible choice: go to the authorities with incomplete evidence and risk being dismissed or discredited, or wait, gather more proof, and hope that Marcus stayed alive long enough for the truth to come out. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this one. Asaham, I made a decision that night that would either save us or destroy my entire career. I was going to gather the evidence myself. No authorities yet. No hospital administration. Just me, watching, documenting, and praying I did not get caught. The problem was that Derek was not working alone, and I had no idea how many people were involved. For all I knew, my supervisor could be part of it, the attending physicians, even security. The safest assumption was to trust no one. I started working extra night shifts, volunteering for the rotations no one else wanted. My colleagues thought I needed the money, or that I was going through a divorce. Let them think whatever they wanted. The truth was, I needed to see what happened when the hospital went quiet, when most of the administration went home, when the skeleton crew took over. That was when the real business happened.
I began carrying a small notebook, writing down everything: who entered the medication room, how long they stayed, what they carried when they left. I memorized faces, shift patterns, behaviors. On my third overnight shift, I saw it happen. 2:17 in the morning. Derek entered the secure medication room with his access badge. Normal. But then, 6 minutes later, another nurse followed him inside. Jessica Park. Someone I barely knew from the orthopedic floor. She had no reason to be in the ICU medication room. They stayed inside for 11 minutes. When they came out, Derek was carrying a small black bag, the kind we use for personal items. He walked calmly to the staff locker room. Jessica returned to her floor. I waited 15 minutes, then checked the medication logs on the computer. Everything looked perfect. Counts matched. No discrepancies. But I had physically counted that morning. I knew we were short on morphine. They were not just stealing. They were professionals, covering their tracks with expertly falsified records. I went to Marcus's room and told him what I saw. He grabbed my hand, his grip tight with urgency. He told me I needed to stop, that I was putting myself in danger, that these people had already tried to kill him once, and they would not hesitate to do it again. But I could not stop, because in that moment, I understood something that made my blood run cold. If they were replacing real medications with placebos, that meant patients all over this hospital were suffering in pain, believing they were receiving treatment when they were getting nothing. Cancer patients, post-surgical patients, people in agony, trusting us to help them, while we poisoned that trust for profit. I thought about Mrs. Chen in room 412, who cried every night because her pain medication did not seem to work anymore. I thought about the teenager in room 209, who screamed during wound dressing changes despite maximum pain protocols. I thought about every family member who asked me why their loved one seemed to be suffering so much when they were supposed to be medicated. Now I knew why, and I could not walk away from that knowledge, not even to save myself. The moral weight of what I knew was crushing. Every shift felt like walking through a minefield. I smiled at Derek when I saw him. I made small talk with Jessica Park when our paths crossed. I pretended everything was normal while my mind raced with impossible questions. Who could I tell? The hospital administration might be involved. If I went to the police without concrete evidence, would they believe a single nurse accusing respected colleagues of a massive conspiracy? Would Marcus and I end up looking like paranoid troublemakers while the real criminals walked free? I decided to build an airtight case. I started accessing the hospital's inventory database from my workstation, cross-referencing physical counts with digital records. I created a spreadsheet on my personal laptop, documenting every discrepancy. The pattern was undeniable. Over the past 6 months alone, thousands of dollars worth of controlled substances had vanished from our supply, all during night shifts, all when specific staff members were on duty. The operation was sophisticated, but it was not perfect. They were getting greedy, taking more, getting careless. But my investigation was not going unnoticed. I started receiving strange looks from colleagues. My supervisor called me into her office to ask if everything was okay at home, commenting that I seemed distracted and that my shift swapping was unusual. I played it off as insomnia and financial stress. She seemed satisfied, but the conversation left me rattled. They were watching me now. I could feel it. The way Derek's eyes followed me in the hallways. The way conversations stopped when I entered the break room. I was running out of time. Then came the night that nearly ended everything. I was working a 12-hour shift, exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. Around 3 in the morning, I decided to check on Marcus before my break. His room was at the end of the ICU corridor, deliberately placed away from the nursing station for privacy. As I approached, I heard voices, low, urgent, angry. I stopped outside the door and listened. It was Derek, and he was not alone. They were arguing about Marcus, about the risks, about how much longer they could keep this going. Then I heard something that made my heart stop. One of them said they should finish what they started, that Marcus was too dangerous to keep alive, that one more cardiac event would not raise suspicions, especially in a patient with his psychological profile. They were planning to kill him. Tonight, I pressed myself against the wall, my mind racing. I had no weapon, no backup, no way to stop them without exposing everything I knew. And then I made the most reckless decision of my life. I walked into that room with my head high and my voice steady, and I told them that Marcus needed immediate blood work ordered by Dr. Richardson, and I needed to draw it now. The lie came out so smoothly I almost believed it myself. Derek stared at me, his expression unreadable. The other person, a man I did not recognize, was dressed in scrubs, but wore no hospital badge. They looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then Derek smiled, that friendly smile I had seen 1,000 times, and said of course, he was just checking on the patient. They left. Marcus and I sat in silence, both of us understanding how close we had just come to disaster. I knew then that I could not wait any longer. Whatever evidence I had, it would have to be enough, because the next time they came for Marcus, I might not be there to stop them. I finished my shift in a daze, my hands shaking every time I touched a patient. I could not eat, could not think straight. I drove home as the sun rose over San Diego, the city waking up while I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I called in sick for my next shift, something I never did, and spent the day organizing everything I had: names, dates, inventory numbers, shift patterns. It was not enough for a conviction, but it was enough to start an investigation. The question was who to call. I decided to reach out to a friend from nursing school who had left healthcare to become an FBI agent. Her name was Christina Torres, and we had stayed in touch over the years. I sent her an encrypted message through a secure app, asking if we could meet. She responded within an hour. We met at a coffee shop in La Jolla, far from the hospital, far from anyone who might recognize me. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. She told me what I was describing was not just theft. It was a federal offense involving narcotics trafficking, insurance fraud, patient endangerment, and potentially organized crime. If the operation had been running for years, as I suspected, we were talking about millions of dollars and dozens of people affected. But she also warned me that I was in serious danger. These people had already attempted murder once. They would not hesitate to do it again. She asked me if I was sure I wanted to continue, if I was prepared for what would come next. The investigations, the testimony, the backlash from colleagues who would not believe me, the possibility that I might never work as a nurse again. I thought about Marcus lying in that hospital bed, waiting for someone to save him. I thought about Mrs. Chen crying in pain. I thought about every patient who trusted us with their lives while we betrayed them for profit. I looked Christina in the eyes and told her I was sure. She made a phone call right there, and within 2 hours, I was sitting in a federal building downtown, giving a formal statement to FBI agents and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Marcus was a Marine, which meant his attempted murder fell under military jurisdiction. They took me seriously. They asked detailed questions, reviewed my documentation, and promised immediate action. But they also told me something that made my blood run cold. They could not move Marcus to a military hospital without tipping off the traffickers. They needed him exactly where he was, as bait, while they built their case, which meant Marcus would have to stay in danger, surrounded by people who wanted him dead, while federal agents worked in the shadows. And they needed me to go back to work, to act normal, to continue my shifts as if nothing had happened. I would be their eyes inside the hospital, their witness, their source. I said yes, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. I returned to work 2 days later, my phone now equipped with a recording app that federal agents had installed. I wore a tiny camera clipped to my hospital badge, disguised as a decorative pin. Every conversation, every movement, every second was being monitored and recorded. I had never felt more exposed or more terrified in my life, but I also felt something else: purpose. For the first time since this began, I was not alone. And Marcus, when I told him what was happening, looked at me with tears in his eyes and said 2 words that I will never forget: thank you. As the next week was the longest of my life, I went to work knowing that federal agents were listening to every word I said. I administered medications, charted vitals, smiled at colleagues, all while documenting everything suspicious. The camera on my badge captured Derek entering the medication room at unusual times. It recorded Jessica Park making unnecessary trips to our floor. It showed the man without a badge slipping through the staff entrance during night shifts, someone who clearly had inside access but no official reason to be there. But the hospital was not stupid. They knew something was wrong. I could feel the tension building. Derek stopped being friendly. He watched me constantly, his eyes cold and calculating. My supervisor started scheduling me away from Marcus's room, assigning me to different patients on the opposite side of the ICU. When I objected, citing continuity of care, she overruled me with a sharpness that was completely out of character. I reported everything to my FBI contact, and they told me to be careful, that the targets were getting nervous, that nervous criminals were the most dangerous kind. Then came the incident that changed everything. I was on a night shift, deliberately scheduled despite my supervisor's attempts to keep me away. Around 2 a.m, all the lights in Marcus's wing suddenly went out. Not the whole hospital, just his corridor. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in eerie red shadows. I ran toward his room, my heart pounding. The cardiac monitor alarm was screaming. When I burst through the door, Marcus was seizing, his body convulsing violently, foam at his lips. Derek was already there, suspiciously fast, a syringe in his hand, claiming he was administering anti-seizure medication. But I had been trained to recognize the signs of different medical emergencies. This was not a seizure. This was cardiac arrhythmia caused by potassium overdose. Someone had injected Marcus with a lethal dose, triggering the exact kind of heart failure that could be explained away as stress-induced sudden cardiac arrest in a young, traumatized veteran. I shoved Derek aside, screaming for help, and started emergency protocols. I administered calcium gluconate to counteract the potassium, started chest compressions, called for the crash cart. Other nurses flooded the room. Dr. Richardson appeared. And through it all, I saw Derek standing in the corner, his face pale, his hands trembling. We We saved Marcus, but barely. He was transferred to the cardiac unit, placed in a medically induced coma to protect his brain and heart, and I knew, without any doubt, that they had just tried to kill him again. Right in front of me, right under the noses of the FBI surveillance. The audacity was staggering, but it was also their biggest mistake, because every second of it was recorded. The camera on my badge captured Derek's syringe, the timing of his arrival, the suspicious power outage. The FBI had their smoking gun. The next morning, I was called into a meeting with hospital administration. Helen Cortez, my supervisor, was there. So was the chief nursing officer and the hospital's legal team. They informed me that I was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into my conduct. They cited emotional involvement with a patient, insubordination, and creating a hostile work environment by making unfounded accusations against colleagues. I was not allowed to return to the hospital until the investigation concluded. I was not allowed to contact other staff members. My badge was deactivated immediately. I walked out of that building feeling like I had been punched in the gut. They were silencing me, and Marcus was still in danger. For 2 days, I heard nothing. No calls from the FBI, no updates on Marcus. I sat in my apartment, paralyzed by fear and frustration, replaying every moment and wondering if I had made the worst mistake of my life. Then, on the 3rd morning, Cristina Torres showed up at my door. She was not alone. 2 other agents were with her, and they were carrying boxes of equipment. She told me that Marcus was safe, transferred quietly to a naval medical facility under armed guard. The attempted murder had accelerated the timeline. They were moving tonight. The FBI had spent the last 72 hours building an airtight case. They had obtained warrants, traced financial records, identified the entire trafficking network. What I had stumbled onto was not just a few nurses stealing medications. It was a sophisticated operation that had been running for 4 years, moving hundreds of thousands of pills into the black market, generating over $3 million in illegal revenue. The network included 5 nurses, 2 physicians, 3 members of hospital administration, a pharmacy technician, and connections to a street-level distribution network in San Diego. But they needed one more thing to guarantee convictions. They needed to catch them in the act with undeniable evidence. And they needed me to help. I said yes, without hesitation. That night, I returned to the hospital, not as a nurse, but as an undercover operative. I wore a wire. I carried a hidden camera. I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. The plan was simple. I would enter through the staff entrance using temporary credentials the FBI had arranged, access the medication room during the night shift, and wait. Federal agents were positioned throughout the hospital, disguised as maintenance workers, patients, family members. At 11:43 that night, Derek entered the medication room. I was already inside, pretending to restock supplies. He froze when he saw me. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Then he smiled that same friendly smile and asked what I was doing back, commenting that he heard I was on leave. I told him I had been cleared, that it was all a misunderstanding. He did not believe me. I could see it in the way his body tensed, the way his hand moved toward his pocket. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to attack me right there. Then Jessica Park entered, followed by the man without a badge. They all stopped, staring at me. The air was electric with tension. And then Derek said something that made my blood freeze. He said they knew I had talked to the FBI, that they had people everywhere, people who kept them informed, that I had made a very big mistake. He reached into his pocket, and I saw the glint of metal, a knife, small, surgical, deadly. I backed toward the door, my hands raised, trying to stay calm. I told them I did not know what they were talking about, that they were scaring me, that I just wanted to do my job. That was when the FBI burst in. Doors slammed open, voices shouting federal agents, hands up, do not move. Derek lunged at me, and I felt the knife slice across my forearm, hot pain searing through shock. Then agents tackled him, and everything became chaos. Handcuffs, Miranda rights, blood running down my arm, Jessica screaming that she wanted a lawyer, the man without a badge trying to run and being taken down by 2 agents in the hallway. It was over in less than 90 seconds, but those 90 seconds contained a lifetime of terror. In those phones, the aftermath was a blur of emergency rooms, police statements, and news vans parked outside Sharp Memorial Hospital. By morning, the story had exploded across local and national media, a major drug trafficking ring operating inside a respected hospital. 5 nurses arrested, including a supervisor, 2 physicians, 3 administrators, including the chief operations officer who had been orchestrating the financial side, laundering money through fake vendor contracts. The FBI seized records showing years of systematic theft, patient endangerment, and fraud. The most devastating revelation came from the patient records. Investigators found that over 200 patients had received placebos instead of pain medication during the time the trafficking ring was active. Cancer patients who suffered needlessly. Post-surgical patients whose recovery was complicated by untreated agony. Elderly patients with chronic pain who stopped believing their doctors cared. The human cost was incalculable, and every single one of those patients patients had trusted us, trusted the institution, trusted the system that had failed them so completely. I spent 3 days testifying before a grand jury. I walked them through every detail, every suspicion, every piece of evidence I had gathered. The federal prosecutors told me I had done something extraordinary, that without my intervention, Marcus would likely be dead, and the trafficking would have continued for years. But I did not feel like a hero. I felt exhausted and angry and heartbroken. I had become a nurse to heal people, and instead, I had discovered that my own colleagues were causing harm for profit. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Some nurses at Sharp Memorial called me a traitor, accused me of destroying careers over paranoid suspicions. Others, the ones who had always felt something was wrong but could not articulate it, reached out to thank me. Patients and families filed lawsuits. The hospital faced massive legal and financial consequences. My own career was in limbo. Even though I was vindicated, even though the FBI publicly praised my actions, I was now the nurse who had gone undercover, who had worn a wire, who had helped send colleagues to prison. No hospital in San Diego would touch me, but then something unexpected happened. Marcus, recovered and returned to active duty, testified on my behalf before a congressional committee investigating healthcare fraud. He told the story of how a nurse he barely knew had risked everything to save his life. His testimony went viral. Suddenly, I was not a traitor. I was a whistleblower, a patient advocate. News outlets wanted interviews. Medical associations invited me to speak about safety protocols and institutional accountability. The American Nurses Association presented me with an award for ethical courage, and slowly, painfully, I rebuilt my life. I took a position as a patient safety consultant, traveling the country to help hospitals identify vulnerabilities in their systems. I became an advocate for stronger oversight of controlled substances, testifying before state legislatures and federal agencies. I wrote articles, gave lectures, trained thousands of nurses on how to recognize the warning signs of internal trafficking. The work was important, but it was not the same as being at the bedside, being the nurse I had trained to become. 5 years have passed since that night in the medication room. Derek Simmons is serving a 22-year federal sentence. Jessica Park received 15 years. The administrators got even longer sentences due to their leadership roles. The 2 physicians lost their medical licenses and are in federal prison. The trafficking network that extended beyond the hospital was dismantled, resulting in 17 total arrests. The street-level dealers, the money launderers, the corrupt pharmacy employees. All of them brought down by one Marine who saw something he should not have, and one nurse who refused to look away. Marcus and I stay in touch. He is stationed in Virginia now, thriving in his career, recently promoted to staff sergeant. We text on holidays. We send each other articles about hospital safety reforms. Last year, he flew to San Diego to attend an event where I was receiving recognition from the California Nurses Association. We had dinner afterward, and he told me something I will never forget. He said that the hardest part of his recovery was not the physical injuries or the attempted murders. It was the feeling that no one would believe him, that he was alone, that the truth did not matter. Until I chose to see him, until I chose to believe. I think about that conversation often now, because the lesson of this experience is not about drug trafficking or corruption. It is about attention, about truly seeing the people in front of us, about trusting our instincts even when everyone else says we are wrong. Marcus pulled away in silence because silence was the only protection he had left, and I saw it because I had learned through years at the bedside that sometimes the most important medical interventions have nothing to do with medications or procedures. Sometimes saving a life means simply paying attention. Sharp Memorial Hospital underwent massive reforms. New oversight systems, independent audits of controlled substances, mandatory reporting structures. The culture changed. Patients are safer now. But I know that similar schemes are happening in hospitals across the country because wherever there are drugs, there is potential for corruption. And wherever there is corruption, there are people like Marcus, trapped and terrified, hoping someone will notice. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever seen something that everyone around you ignored? Have you ever felt that you should act, even when no one believed you? Have you ever had to choose between your career and doing what is right? Tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Because these conversations matter. These stories matter. They remind us that courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and acting anyway. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel for more real stories that reveal the extraordinary courage of ordinary people in impossible situations. And do not miss the next recommended video, because every story here is a reminder that the truth, no matter how dangerous it is, always deserves to be told. We are all capable of seeing what others miss. We are all capable of being the person who refuses chooses to look away. The only question is whether we will choose to act when that moment comes. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that one person can make a difference. And thank you for reminding me, through your attention and your compassion, why I became a nurse in the first place: to heal, to protect, and to never, ever stop fighting for what is right.